the ugly. Unfortunately, we haven't got our resident Giant here either, Andrew, because we are going to talk about the New York Giants. Adam, in this stuff with Deshaun Watson's come up, and everyone's now got more into the microscope with about how terrible the Cleveland Browns trade was and signing him to that money. And then, of course, that goes on to also Russell Wilson moving to the Broncos and signing all that money. Are we having to face the facts here that really the worst thing that's happened out of all of that, not the worst thing, because if the Chargers up how with Deshaun Watson, that is obviously the worst thing. But in football, I mean, is the worst thing, the worst facts that we have to face is the huge contract that the New York Giants signed Daniel Jones to with that 4-year, $160 million contract. This was just such a complete mistake by the organization. And it's just made Brian Dable and Joe Schoen just look so terrible, I think. And it's so on the spotlight of them. I've seen Joe Schoen being the more one for that than Dable, who's the head coach. But this was just terrible. The 28-6 against the Vikings. Daniel Jones, 22-42, 186 yards, 2 interceptions. And this is not new. This sort of thing, we've seen this. Like, what is going on, Adam? I mean, what is going on?
Not a lot. That's the problem. I think that's the real issue. It's a really difficult one to put your finger on as to why they decided to go down that route, other than the fact that they felt like he could do something. I mean, that's kind of all it is. I don't know how else you can think of that giving up that much money on a contract like that would be a good idea, other than you believed in him. That's all it is. And I know that the owner's a very big fan of his, and that's something that is like has been quite well documented over the last few years. And despite the fact that there are a lot of Giants fans that are not happy, and this was before this season, we're not happy with Daniel Jones, it does kind of feel a little bit like, well, there isn't anyone else. Like, I mean, who else do we get, or what else do we do? And, you know, they had their chance to get a quarterback in the draft, and they decided to go against that and go in a different way and bring in Malik Neighbors, which I think arguably you could argue is the right move for them, because I think that he does have the potential to really be a strong wide receiver in this league. So I can completely understand why you would go down that route. But yeah, I think it is literally just that they believe that he could do something, and they've obviously really got it wrong, and now they're having to pay the price for that. And it's going to take a long time, I think, in order for that to work, because you're just kind of stuck now, like in a situation where it's almost like you're just waiting for that contract to be okay to get rid of him. You know, that's what it is. It's now it's basically the cap hit is essentially what we're waiting on now, for the cap hit to be manageable. And so he goes, which I think is at the end of this season. I think that seems to be the argument a lot of people are putting out, that they feel like they could swallow the cap hit at the end of the season, get rid of him, and bring in a quarterback through the draft. And I think that's all it's down to. And it's a, you know, sometimes it hits, and unfortunately for the Giants, this time it hasn't. And that's pretty much all it is, really.
I mean, James, this is going to be a very rare occasion for the Franchise Tag Podcast. We're going to have a fresh opinion on something, because, you know,
that's true.
The spoiler alert, if you actually want to know what we think of most things, watch like 10 episodes prior, and you probably get the same thing, because we do go around in circles a little bit, because that's just how it is. You know, the same topics come up, but you are going to give us a completely fresh opinion on the New York Giants. You know, what's your take on the Giants and Daniel Jones and all of this just nonsense of this organization, it feels like?
Yeah, I mean, let's just look at this stat just for a second. The Giants are 1-7 in their past 8 season openers, and they've been outscored in their last 2 alone, 68-6. This isn't just a Daniel Jones issue. This is a franchise-wide team issue. I think they just feel a little bit directionless. Like whoever is really in control doesn't really have a great grasp of how to build a good football team. Now, giving Daniel Jones a lot of money when they did was risky at that time, and that risk hasn't paid off. You talk about moving, swallowing the cap hit and moving Daniel Jones on. I can't see where you would move Daniel Jones onto. The only teams I can think that would take Daniel Jones at the moment all play in the UFL, and none of them are a proper NFL. I just don't know how you move on from him. You have to, I think, swallow the cap hit and bring somebody else in through the draft so that it just feels a little bit more palatable across the board. I just think the Giants to me feel like they wrote all their problems down on post-it notes and put them on a dartboard, and then threw three, saw where they landed, and then went, okay, let's address those. And they just aren't in the same areas. They're not building well on offense. They're not necessarily building well on defense. The line is average. The receivers have been poor. Malik Neighbors will hopefully improve them, but somebody's then got to throw the ball to him, and I just don't know who that is at this moment in time. I know that they've obviously announced Daniel Jones to be the starter next week, but it won't be long before you see Drew Lock. I don't think this season. I mean, it just smacks of incompetence, and we've seen it with other teams before, and they are able to get out of it. They have some pieces, but they just need a more clear strategy, or to just come out and say, this isn't working. Let's just tear this thing down and start again.
So you don't think there's any argument that they have made an effort to build around him? Because if you look at their drafting, they've drafted Neighbors, a wide receiver for him. He hasn't had a proper wide receiver. He's got that now. They've drafted O-linemen consistently, and some of them worked out. So Evan Neal, it feels like we're not sure on. But is there not any argument that they have sort of given him the opportunity to prove it in a way?
Yes, but not enough. It feels like they've done half a job, but never really fully seen it through. They've brought in a receiver near enough every year, and it's never really worked. And Neighbors hopefully will change that.
Kenny Galladay's knocking around New Jersey.
He's just riding the fair at Coney Island somewhere, just going round and round and just living his best life. And I don't blame him, to be fair. They obviously, drafting O-lineman, like you said, that is a very hit and miss affair for all teams. So perhaps there is being a little bit too harsh there. Some really work out, some don't. But they just, when you go back over the last few drafts as well, and you see the players that they passed up on, you just think this could have been such a much better team than it is now. And every team is guilty at some point of giving a player too much money and it not working out. In various positions. Look at the Seahawks and Jamal Adams, for example. It just didn't work. Not for want of trying, and it's not for want of trying with Daniel Jones. I do feel a bit sorry for him in a way. Like, I don't feel like he's been properly propped up for success. And then you put him in those horrendous uniforms as well this time, and that just sort of compounds the problem. What are those trousers, man? Oh my God, they're awful. It's just, yeah. I feel for the Giants. They feel like a franchise on the edge, and Jones is going to be the obvious scapegoat given the money issue. You see the things after the game where he's being heckled in the parking lot when he's trying to leave the stadium and stuff, and he takes it. He's there. He is your player. He is capable. He has got elements to his game. We've seen his ground game work well before in the past, and it's not like he can't sling it. We know he's got a pretty cannon of an arm. Really, It's just inconsistent. And like you said earlier on, mediocrity can get you so far. It can get you 6 to 8 wins. I mean, it doesn't help the division that they're in and other such things, but going after the face of your franchise pretty much in the parking lot afterwards just isn't helping anybody. And I get there's frustration there, and Giants fans are one of those fan bases that are super vocal because they're super passionate and they love their team. And I think more of the frustration is probably towards ownership. And I think that's what a lot of the boos are in the stadium. That is not necessarily aimed. It is aimed at the team on the field, obviously, but in the fact that they're not being given more to be able to be at least good. And I just feel like it's going to be another long season for them, unfortunately. And that's just, football's a little bit more fun when the Giants are interesting. They're just, in that division and everything. Well, in that division with the Cowboys, I don't like the Cowboys, so it just feels like the lesser of two evils slightly. There's anybody, Jones, to be fair.
The Giants in that division do feel like the least amount of evil, I suppose.
Washington.
Washington.
I'm okay with the Eagles. Their fans are annoying but kind of funny at the same time.
I'm going to stop you there. Yeah, no one's okay with the Eagles on this podcast. Adam, let's go on to you, Adam. As Andrew, who is watching this, has politely told us about how he can't blame the O-line after some stats that we've got from them with very little amount of sacks, pressures, or hits in the Minnesota game. So he's alluding to the fact that it is Daniel Jones, but is it Daniel Jones or is it the organization? Because like I just said, I feel like they have put him in position to win, but then also when you look at the moves, like you were happy as Larry when Xavier McKinney left and joined your organization. The Eagles after this weekend with the Saquon deal. I mean, look what he did against the Packers and how well he played against them. I mean, is there a blame to share, or are we leaning towards more the organization here?
I think when you start making them kind of moves, that does kind of feel like a reboot type of thing to do. If you start taking away your star running back and you start taking away one of your captains on the defense, that is like we're going to look at redoing stuff, and we can't, because you're not going to keep you're only going to keep these guys if you think you can do something. So if you feel like you can't do something, you're going to get rid of them. It's like you can't afford to keep them. Money-wise. So I just kind of felt like it is a little bit on the organization, but the problem is that Daniel Jones hasn't been great. So to be honest, it's probably a bit of both. And that kind of, I know it's a bit sit on the fence, but it kind of is a little bit of both that have caused the problem here. And Andrew's kind of right when he talks about the O-line not being so much of the problem. I do think that the O-line actually has got some players on it that are decent players, and they've kind of done okay. And in the respect of, like he was saying, there wasn't a great deal of pressure put on Daniel Jones, and they kept the pass rushing from the Vikings away a little bit. But the run game wasn't great, and that kind of is a little bit on the O-line as well. It's like you've got to create the lanes for the running back sometimes, and so there are a few issues with that. It's like Devin Singletary didn't do brilliant. I think he had like 37 yards from 10 attempts. I mean that's not fantastic, It's one of them things where it just kind of does feel a little bit like everything. And then the defense, to me, I mean, we were talking about it yesterday. Sam Darnold, lots of people are coming out saying how great Sam Darnold was in that game. His receivers had so much space. There was no one near Jefferson. Like, he was literally just in acres of space when he caught the ball every time. And you just sort of think to yourself, that kind of is an organization thing. Have they just brought in the wrong players? Have they just drafted not very well over the last few years and stuff like that? Is that where the problem is? And I just kind of feel like it's everything. And of course, now the pressure is just going to go on pretty much everyone. And Dayball's going to get it as well. And he probably, to a certain degree, doesn't deserve it. Like, he hasn't done that bad there. The first season, he got him in the playoffs. And it's been nothing but a nightmare since for him. So it kind of feels like it's not so much his fault, but he's going to start feeling pressure because, you know, when these things happen, someone has to be sacked, don't they? That's how it works. So it's like someone's going to get it. But
and they can't sack Jones. It'll cost too much money.
No. So I just think they need to. I don't know. It's really difficult because I think it's difficult to come out and say this on week one because you have to try and give some hope in order to sell some tickets. But you just sort of feel like they need to just come out and be truthful and be like, look, this isn't a great team. We are in a rebuild. And that's basically what they are now.
Yeah, sort of getting ahead of it before it comes
in
the arse, which it is now coming by a bit in the arse. But you're right about Symmetry, 10 carries, 37 yards, 3.7 average yards per play. And it's funny because you were saying that I saw in chat earlier, it was like, well, Darren Jones is starting against Commanders. Well, why would you then start Drew Lock? We know this team isn't going to be a winning team. You're ultimately, if this carries on, you'll play for the highest draft pick you can do. If Daniel Jones is losing you as many games as Drew Lock is going to be losing you games, because I believe Drew Lock will probably also lose you games, then you don't need to drop Daniel Jones. Just ride this wave and ride it out. Like it's so strange to me with that because, you know, it is week one. You're not going to go with playing for a draft pick. But let's face it. I don't think this is going to get better. We've talked about it in this episode already, cobwebs, and some teams are probably not going to look the same in week two straight off the bat. This is the only team I feel like doesn't. The Carolina Panthers, I think, are a close second as well. But this is one of the teams that doesn't feel like it is going to. I mean, there will be elements of magic with Malik Neighbors. Of course, there will be. He's fantastic. And Kayvon Thibodeau is still a fantastic edge rusher as well. There'll be moments of magic with him. I saw him actually, interestingly, completely ignoring a reporter's question about the work they did on that D line that there, and I don't like to comment on them sort of stuff usually, but you know, when you just go into very early on with reporters, it's New York, buddy. You're going to be disgruntled a lot by the New York media and the New York press. Unfortunately, that is going to be consistent throughout your career there.